Okay, in today's tutorial I'm going to teach you how to create a chord progression at the piano. It's kind of a useful skill in all kinds of contexts. If you're interested in songwriting or composition, then knowing how to create chord progressions is super useful. Yeah, a lot of songwriters start with a chord progression, but before they even think of melody or words. Equally, if you're interested in improvisation, whether it's pop or jazz or cocktail or whatever, then being able to build a progression of your own kind of unleashes all kinds of possibilities for creativity and for practice. Usually if I post a tutorial about improv, I give you the chord progression. Whereas, if you can create your own, you can think of your own improvisation exercises. And finally, knowing this kind of thing is also a great way of reinforcing your understanding of how music theory, of how chords work. Okay, so let's get started creating a chord progression. I'm going to imagine that we are in the key of C major because it's nice and simple and clear. And I'm going to assume that you know the basic identities of basic chords like C and D minor and G and all the rest. If you don't, wheel back in my timeline, look at my earlier videos, have a look at my book, How to Really Play the Piano, stuff your teacher never taught you. All the chords are in there. But I'm going to assume for now that you know that stuff. Okay, so we're in the key of C major and we have that scale of C major. Now, as you may know, any major or minor key has a certain number of chords that come naturally to it, that are naturally occurring to that key, and they are built on the scale of that key. And in major keys we call those the diatonic chords. Okay, you can probably see how I'm building those chords on the scale there. There's the scale, and there are the diatonic chords of C major. Let's just quickly go through and name them. We've got C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, doesn't occur that often, but it crops up in the scale, and back to C. We've also got the kind of basic extensions and developments of those chords, C major 7, E minor 7, G7, that kind of thing. Yeah. So if we're going to create a chord progression, those diatonic chords, the diatonic chords of C major, are our basic toolkit for doing so. We might use other chords that are non-diatonic to the key of C, an A flat chord might creep up in there, but by and large, most of the time the chords we're going to be using are the diatonic chords of C major. And you will write whole songs, create whole progressions that use nothing but those diatonic chords. Okay, so the underlying principle to understand in any chord progression is that it is a journey, or in fact a series of journeys. It's a series of journeys from what we call the tonic chord, the chord that the key is named after, C, out, far from that chord, and back again. Okay, so we're always starting at C, we're going on a journey, and we're coming back again. And the furthest point that we will often get to on that journey is what we call the dominant chord. Okay, the chord that is built on the fifth note of the scale, in this case in the key of C major, G, or often G7. Yeah, that's what we call the dominant chord of the key. Yeah, and it's kind of as far away from C as we can get. Sometimes we'll jump there straight away, sometimes we won't. But once we're there, once we're on G, the progression really wants to come back to C. It really wants to resolve onto C. You can hear that strong resolving effect. G7, C. Or it wants to resolve onto a chord that is like C. Okay. For example, A minor, which is also in the the diatonic chords of C major. So the first thing to do is to think of your chord progression as the journey out and back, out and back. I'm going up and down the keyboard. You don't have to go higher and get lower in the keyboard, but just think of it as that journey between C and far distant places, maybe as far as the dominant chord, the number 5 chord, and back again. Okay. The second important thing to know is that chord progressions usually, but not always, have a number of bars in them that is divisible by 4. Okay, that's a very big generalization, and it is fundamentally based on the principles of songwriting. Yeah, if you are interested in classical music or prog rock or anything like that, where things get much more complex, that won't hold true. But in the average song, you will find that the subdivisions of that song, or the whole song itself, will have a number of bars that is divisible by 4. Yeah, so 12-bar blues, divisible by 4. A lot of songs have 8 or 16 bar verses and choruses. Yeah, again, divisible by 4. So, although that won't always be the case, we might create 10 or 20, or divisible by 4, 10 or 17 bars or whatever. More often than not, our chord progression is going to be 8 or 12 or 16 or 24 or 32 bars in length. Yeah, and one of the things you can do is start off, if you like, with a grid like this. Okay, so there I've got an empty grid of 16 bars, and I've started it with a C at the beginning and a C at the end. The final chord might also be a G, okay, a dominant chord to lead us back to the start again, but for now we're going to leave it as C so we can see that that's kind of the conclusion. So we've got those 2 bars, and we've got all the stuff in the middle to fill in. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? One of the things that I typically do is, and this sounds really kind of amateurish, but it's not, is just kind of sit at the piano and see where my fingers lead me. Okay. Have a look at what's going on in my left hand there in particular. Notice how I instinctively followed a fairly natural bass line. Okay, that bass line had a shape to it. And often that's really important in defining the kind of chords that you're going to use. So I had C in the left, and then I went there, okay? Because B seems to suggest a G chord, which, as I said, is a long jump out straight away, out into the unknown. We've got C, the tonic chord, we're out to the dominant, whoa, miles away, okay? Where are we going to go back to? Well, a good place would be a chord that is like C but isn't C, because if we just go back to C, well, we could, some songs will do that, but it's kind of not adventurous. There are cooler places to go. So a natural place to go might be a chord like C, which is A minor, which as you'll notice shares 2 notes with C. Okay, so just by playing around and by thinking about a natural kind of shape of bass line in the left, I've gone C, G, but with a B in the bass. Okay, just because we're playing a G chord doesn't mean we have to use the note G in the bass to A minor. Okay, and then I went to F. Okay, and that has got me, or can get me, 4 bars, the first 4 bars of my progression. After that, the natural place to go is back to C again. Okay, we've kind of reached a far out point at the F. It's not quite a number 5 chord, it's not quite a dominant chord, but it's quite a long way out from C. And the kind of the harmonic grammar suggests now is the time to go back to C. Okay, let's just revisit those first 4 bars again and think about some of the stuff that I did there. You might be saying, why do I have to choose that? If I've got the B in the bass, why do I have to choose that G in the second bar? There are other chords in C major that have a B in them. For example, there's B diminished, which we could use, although it's kind of similar to G7 anyway. Or maybe we could use E minor. And there's no real reason why we couldn't, okay? So we could swap out that G and put an E minor in instead. Okay, and it works just as well. For my money though, and certainly in this progression, I'm going to stick with the G. I kind of like the I kind of like the clarity and the punch of the C to G, okay, to A minor. There's a very there's kind of an elegance in there that I don't think you get quite as much with the C, E minor, A minor. Perhaps because the E minor to the A minor doesn't resolve quite as well. One thing I should say, I'm very studiously avoiding a lot of technical language here. There are, if you ever study harmony formally, there are a lot of rules about what chord can follow what chord and so on and so forth, and people start talking about cadences and submediants and mediants and dominants and supertonics and all of that kind of thing, and that's cool. And if you're ever going to be a music student and get really into formal analysis of music, then you need to know that stuff. But if you're going to be a songwriter, you don't need all that stuff. Yeah, much better to just have some sort of understanding of how the chords fit together, and learn using your ear, really, and learn with what sounds right. But there are one or two things to bear in mind, and in particular, that natural flowing line in the left is good. And also, and this is something I've talked about before, moving from chord to chord by shared notes. So a lot of the chords that I'm using there, that I'm moving between there, share some notes. So C goes to G, and there's that shared note up there. Goes to A minor, yeah, no shared notes unless I make it A minor 7. Okay, that's quite a cool sound, and keep the G. Okay, and then to F, which again has got shared notes with the A minor chord. So progressions tend to work best and sound most natural when they're quite organic. Okay. Let's go back and look at our 16-bar progression. Again, we have now got our first line filled in. Okay, so I've got 4 bars there, 4 measures, I should say, if you're in the US. I don't have to have just one chord per bar. You know, I could quite easily, put 2 chords in a bar. You know, two beats for each chord. But for now, I'm keeping it simple and going like that. So as I said, I've got those 4 bars, and then at the start of the 5th bar, it seems to be natural to go back to C. Now, what I could do here is just repeat exactly the progression that I've just had. C, G, A minor, F. But it would be kind of cool to do something a bit different. So, again, thinking about shared notes and maybe thinking about a natural bass line, we could do something like C, E minor, F, G. And again, look how I've got that quite natural bass line. Yeah, so my first 4 bars, the bass line went down there. Now it's coming up like this. Okay. And you'll see now on bar 8, we're kind of at the furthest point out. We're on that dominant chord, the G chord. Yeah. So let's just have a play through and a listen. Playing it really simply. Okay, something interesting about those final 3 chords, actually, the E minor, F, G, is that they're quite jumpy. There aren't a lot of shared notes there, and that's fine. But a good progression will have that happening less often than movement between chords with shared notes. Okay, so just something for you to bear in mind. So now we're kind of at the furthest point out. We've got half of our progression. We've got G. Where do we go next? Okay, well, we could go back to C again. Okay, but for my money, that's kind of getting a little bit repetitive. I kind of I've been to C before. Let's go somewhere else. Where else can we go from G? What else will G comfortably resolve onto? Well, we've already seen that G will quite happily resolve to A minor, so we could go there. Equally, G will resolve reasonably well back down to F, okay? Or to a chord that's like F, which is D minor, which is the chord I'm going to go to. So my next little block of 4 bars, starting on bar 9, is going to start on D minor. Okay, And again, I'm going to play around with it and see where I can go. And thinking about the toolbox of chords that I've got, the diatonic chords of C major, I'm going to come up with another 4 bars, just by playing around. So let's say we get to something like this. So now we've got a kind of section that's got a more sort of a minor feel to it, which is a nice contrast to the earlier 2 sets of 4 bars, and contrasting things and creating that kind of artistic tension, if you like, that contrast brings is a really important point in building progressions. Okay, let's just name those chords again. So we've got D minor, and back up to G again, and people are like, oh, when is C going to come back? And it's at this point that your brain, even if you know nothing about music, is really thinking, oh, when are we going to come back to that C? But oh no, not yet, because we're going to go from the G to the E minor, which is kind of sounds a little bit like C, but we're not there. I'm teasing you a little bit, because we're going then to A minor, which again is a little bit like C, has the shared notes. E minor shares notes with C, the E and G. A minor shares the E and the C, but we're not back there yet. So you think, right, maybe now is the time to go back to C at the start of our final 4 bars, starting on bar, what's it going to be, 13? Yeah. Okay, but that's kind of unsatisfying. See how going from the A minor to the C doesn't work quite as well. The A minor wants to go somewhere else. Yeah, so let's go from bar 9 again, D minor, little passing note in the bass there, and then let's go to F, to G again, and then we'll finish with 2 bars of C. It's always a good idea to finish with 2 bars of the tonic, often if you can, because that gives you room to put in what we call a turnaround, which is a little mini progression based on a dominant or dominant 7th chord to take you comfortably back to the start of the progression, or you can just end the song there. So now we've got our chord progression, we can begin to play around with it and to improvise. If we're songwriting, this is the stage at which we would start to kind of listen out for little bits of emerging melody or motifs, stuff we can take forward to the next stage of the creative process, if you like. We might do something that's a bit like this. And just by playing around, just by noodling around with the different inversions and voicings of the chords there, the different shapes I was playing them in, you can begin to hear little bits of melody, little bits of idea emerge, stuff that if we were songwriting we could start to take forward. Okay, so there we go. I'll leave it at that for today. What you can do now is go to the piano with a bit of those really old-fashioned technologies, a pencil and a little bit of paper, and start playing around by yourself. Just a couple of quick plugs. As I say, if you are really new to kind of chords and harmony, do have a look at my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, because An awful lot of it is in there, all the kind of basics that, the basic chord shapes, how they're built, all in there. And there's also a bunch of stuff on improvisation. The book's really quite dense with useful stuff that can help you develop your piano skills. If you're buying right now, especially if you're overseas, then at the time of making this, we're in July 2016, the pound is really, really low. Okay, so if you're buying in dollars, then you will get a really great deal on the on either edition of the book. There's a print edition and there's a digital edition, and on the digital edition I'm actually running a summer special offer at the moment, at least until the end of this month and maybe into August. You can pick up the digital edition of How to Really Play the Piano and my other book, my cocktail piano book, for just £7.49, which is about $10 at the moment. Okay, so pretty good deal there. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't seen it already, my new book, 7 Studies in Pop Piano, is available in a free beta version at the moment. If you go to the relevant web address, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the video. You can download your free PDF and try that out, and that would be cool, especially if you could fill in the survey afterwards, so I can get on and make a print edition of that later in the year. Finally, if you're supporting me on patreon.com, that's amazing. Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate it. If you're not, do go and check out my profile, patreon.com/Bill Hilton. The more support I get, the more time I have for doing this stuff, for making tutorials, for writing books, all the rest of it. Okay, so there we go. Have a great weekend. Have tremendous fun at the piano, playing around with your chord progressions. I hope you have, a really good time doing this stuff.